Once we've established our long-term community goal, as well as our current community condition or our problem statement, we can go ahead and start developing our project goal. And the project goal states the improved situation that will be achieved as a result of the project's successful completion. So once your project has been completed, what is the improved state in your community? And we want our project goal to be brief, to the point. 1 to 2 sentences is always good enough for a project goal. We also want it to be realistic, right? So we don't want to state more than your project or your organization can reasonably accomplish. Your project goal should also determine the scope of the project as well as the population impacted. It should also show that it brings a community one step closer to reaching the long-term community goal. It also describes how the current community condition, your problem statement, will be improved, reduced, or eliminated, or how it increases the community's capacity to address that barrier. So if we take a look at some example project goals, right? If we go back to our running examples, we're looking at the one that's about home ownership, right? So if the long-term community goal is everyone in our community owns their home, your problem or condition statement is that 20% of the households in our community are middle income earners and would like to be homeowners but can't qualify for a mortgage loan. Then perhaps while you're developing your project, right, the goal of your project, that statement would be to increase home ownership potential for middle income earners in our community. Now, let's take a look at how this is framed, right? We are increasing home ownership potential because, right, we talked about you don't want to promise things that are out of your control. So for example, folks actually buying a house is still out of your control. There's a lot of factors toward home ownership. However, what your project is proposing to accomplish is to increase home ownership potential, right? So if we look back to your problem in your condition statement, currently 20% of your community currently can't qualify for the mortgage loan. So qualifying for a mortgage loan increases your potential for ownership, right? So if you're proposing a project, you can't force people to buy a house. However, you can help them increase their home ownership potential, right? Through financial literacy or through helping them develop a savings account and a savings plan. So that is something that a project can accomplish. It can increase their home ownership potential. And for who? What is the population we're identifying? Middle income earners in your community. Another example, if we are looking at developing a language project, we already identified the long-term community goal is that everyone in the community speaks the language fluently at home, at work, and at community events. And the identified current community condition was access to language learning is only available in college and university classes, right? So the problem is that access to learning their language is very limited. In fact, it's limited to only in college and university classes, which means it's only limited to university students, which means it's only limited to students who are paying tuition or who have been accepted into college and the university, right? So we've already identified it's a very niche population. And so when you develop your project and you're looking, what is the positive impact you want your project to establish in your community, right? So a project goal possibly could be to increase the number of families in our community who speak the language in their homes, right? So you are looking at developing a project that impacts families, right? Because whole families are not necessarily able to be in college or university classes. And you're also identifying the scope. You want them to be proficient enough in the language to speak their language at home with each other, right? So that's that positive change that your project aims to implement into your community, right? After your project's been successfully implemented, you should see an increase of number in families in your community who can speak the language at home. Or if you are trying to develop a project that's looking at generational transference of cultural knowledge, right? So the long-term community goal is to maintain and preserve the history, heritage, culture, and spiritual beliefs of our native culture and to pass them on to future generations. That's that foundational goal that your community has identified. And the identified problem statement was the rate of traditional practices and teachings that are passed on has decreased with each generation. You can develop a project goal that addresses that condition statement and brings you one step closer to achieving the long-term community goal by implementing an after-school program for families on cultural teachings and practices, right? So each step in this framework really addresses the one before. And your long-term community goal is still your foundational achievement that ideally 5 to 10 years or in the future, your community would like to see itself in that state and achieve that goal. But your project brings it one step closer to achieving that goal. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are achieving the goal. However, you and your implementation of your project, I should say, is helping your community move one step closer. It's also helping your community identify and address that barrier statement, your current community condition. Your project is going to address the barrier that's keeping your community from achieving that goal. So if we look at activity 3 in the worksheets, you can go ahead and write down the previously identified long-term community goal, as well as the current community condition that you identified. And once you've done that, when you move into the next box, it's asking you to look at your current community condition and then develop a project goal that will reduce, eliminate, or improve the current community condition or increase your community's capacity to address that barrier. And once you've done that, at the bottom in the last box, it's going to ask you to describe the sector of the community that will participate in the project as part of reaching the project goal. That's helping you identify the population that will be impacted. Is it families, or is your project aimed at middle income earners? Is your project aimed at children or elders? So it's going to help you narrow the scope of your project in case it's a little too broad. But it'll also help you start to really hone in and refine the aspects of your project. So go ahead and pause this video and fill out the worksheet and try to develop your project goal. And don't forget, you should always reference back to the current community condition and the long-term community goal, and make sure that your project aligns, that it addresses the current community condition and also is going to help bring your community one step closer to reaching the long-term community goal.